In 1964, the eyes of the world were fixed on Japan as the Olympic Games kicked off in Tokyo. But it wasn't the medals or parades that captured the world's attention. It was the Shinkansen, a revolutionary high-speed train shooting passengers across the country at record speed. The bullet train was the envy of the world, firing the starter pistol on a global race to be the next country to enter the high-speed club. In pole position was the United States. With its technical prowess and superpower resources, work began on an all-American train that would leave the Shinkansen in the dust.
Hitting a top speed of 156 miles an hour, nearly double today's fastest speed.
But while the bullet train became a national icon in Japan, 60 years on, the US is still struggling to build its first high-speed rail line.
This is a story of failed ambition, but with a legacy that, to this day, remains of critical importance to rail in the United States. This is what happened when America tried to build a bullet train.
President Johnson has some words of congratulations for congressional leaders who spurred the tax bill through both houses.
President Lyndon B. Johnson was a man with a vision. When he took office in 1963, he set out to transform America into the Great Society.
The policies he introduced sought to right wrongs in every part of American life, including transport.
The US had developed the most technologically advanced vehicles in and out of the world, but with one major exception. We have airplanes which fly 3 times faster than sound. We have television cameras that are orbiting Mars. But we have the same tired and inadequate mass transportation between our towns and cities that we had 30 years ago.
If you didn't have a car, getting around the country was a slog.
And to make it worse, Japan, a country the US was at war with just 20 years earlier, was now leading the world with its latest locomotive.
A bullet might be fast, but an eagle is faster.
In 1965, LBJ signed the High-Speed Ground Transportation Act. Its goal was simple: to back the research and development of a high-speed train network in the US. Although this wasn't America's first foray into high-speed rail. Here's historian Robert Holzweiss to tell us more.
The New York Central Railroad in the late 1950s did a demonstration project in Ohio. It mounted 2 airline jet engines on the top of what we call a rail diesel car, or an RDC. It's just one passenger car. And they went 170 something miles an hour across a straight, flat piece of track. The area that was chosen to do this was purposely done. It was flat and straight, and the infrastructure was in very good condition. I don't think there was any serious consideration of making these an actual way of transporting people.
Fortunately, there were other, less insane attempts to get high-speed rail up and running. Enter Senator Claiborne Pell. In 1962, he had developed the Pell Plan. It called for a revitalised rail network serving the highly dense cluster of cities along the northeast coast, a network we now call the Northeast Corridor. As people moved from the cities to the suburbs, millions took to the roads to begin commuting. But as those roads quickly clogged up, another solution was needed.
Interstate highways were a big impact on the U.S. culture, and we are a car culture. And there was definitely a movement forward to get into more mass transportation. What became known as the Northeast Corridor, then owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad, was a prime target for that. It was already electrified, had been since 1930s, and it was ripe for further development into a more high-speed transportation corridor between the economic capital of the U.S., New York, and the political capital, Washington, D.C.
As Johnson's high-speed dream began to take shape, it did so in the form of Senator Pell's plan for the Northeast Corridor. The bill sponsored 2 test projects. The first was this: the turbo train. Using an electric engine and a diesel-powered turbine, it would run between New York and Boston. The second scheme would serve the crucial New York to Washington route, and it was this that would go on to have the most lasting impacts on US rail.
Now, we're going way back into the midst of time with this story when they had to work with very primitive technology. I have an example of it here. It's called pen and paper. I borrowed these from a local museum, but no one really knows how they work. Fortunately, in today's enlightened age, we can rely on more advanced technology such as Odoo. Odoo is an all-in-one business management platform that takes all the painful stuff about running a business and makes it a breeze. Forget building a new railway, running the B1M comes with a ton of back-office work. Chasing invoices, signing contracts, scheduling resources, HR, you name it. But now I can do all of that within Odoo because they've taken 45 apps and brought them all into one efficient ecosystem. Everything communicates seamlessly, and Odoo can even automate manual tasks that seem trivial until you miss a zero off when copying data across, and then everything goes off the rails. You can tailor everything to your specific needs, plus it's scalable. So you can start off small and add apps as your business grows. But the best part is that your first app is completely free for life, and that includes unlimited support and hosting. All you've got to do is choose your first app and give it a try. You can do that by scanning the QR code on screen or clicking the link in the description to get started today. Now I'm going to let you guys watch the rest of the video while I'll figure out what to do with this. Now, if you're building a high-speed rail line, there are a few things you've got to take into consideration.
First off, travelling fast means you'll feel any bump or jolt far more than at lower speeds. So your track needs to be welded into place to stop the trains and the passengers being shaken to pieces. That familiar click-clack sound as the train passes over different sets of rails is gone. Secondly, you want as few things to slow you down as possible. Top of that list are corners. Any curves along the route need to be as shallow and gentle as possible. Going round a corner at high speed means the centrifugal force will throw the train outwards, so the angle or cant of the track needs to be raised to balance the load applied on the rails. Finally, you'll also need a reliable power supply. For electric trains, that's supplied by the overhead wires known as a catenary.
At high speeds, the pantograph would bounce and lose contact with the wire. And so they had to change the way the wire was strung, and they also had to change the way the pantograph operated from a sort of a triangular shape to a V shape, and to keep tension on it and keep it in contact with the wire.
In 1966, work began on upgrading a 21-mile stretch of track, which would be used to test the first cars before work on the whole line was complete.
The test area was going to be in New Jersey, where it was already a significant amount of flat and straight track, just like in the Ohio example with the New York Central a decade earlier. And so they wanted to make sure that everything worked properly before they built out from there and improved the infrastructure.
But that was the easy bit, and it wasn't long before the project started going off the rails. At the time, the whole line was owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad. The deal was that the US government would pay for the upgrade of the track, while the PRR would fork out for the trains. But that didn't exactly give them a free hand.
Because of the project's short timeframes, the PRR wanted to buy trains that would run at 120 miles an hour. They'd be fairly straightforward to build and wouldn't need all the expensive track upgrades that were proposed.
But for the government, that completely missed the point. This wasn't just about a modest upgrade in service, this was supposed to be America's ticket into the first class lounge of high-speed train service. It was supposed to make the 130 miles per hour of the bullet train look half-cocked.
This was a red line. The trains had to hit 150 miles per hour. So this is what they came up with, the Metroliner. Now, I know what you're thinking. It doesn't look very high speed. The turbo train looked more like a jet plane than a train. The bullet train looked and sounded cool. The Metroliner just kind of looked like a normal train. Because it was. Deadlines were so tight, there was no time to develop a prototype. So the PRR bought a series of existing train cars and began extensive upgrades to transform them into high-speed units. The car's electrics were stripped out and replaced with a new high-speed gearing system. Each car was fitted with a new pantograph to create a more reliable connection to the overhead power lines. 2 types of suspension were used. Coil springs were fitted to take the weight of the train, and air springs were used to compensate for the weight of the passengers. A new computerized speed control system was fitted, which allowed the driver to set the train's speed by a dial and then leave any braking or accelerating to be done by the train's onboard computer. A partnership with Bell Laboratories even equipped the trains with a radical new invention that allowed people to place a call anywhere in the US: the cell phone. The route was marked with coils, which, as the train passed over, switched the phone signal to the local frequency or cell that it was travelling through.
On Amtrak's Metroliner service, you can spread out over breakfast.
This was definitely targeted toward businessmen and people who needed to work as they traveled in comfort and quiet, and also the communication. And they were designed as a high-speed, very comfortable, air-conditioned, very well-appointed interior with club cars.
The trains weren't completely devoid of streamlining. A new front panel was added to the cars, but any more than this was considered unnecessary. It would also clash with how the trains were to be used. The Japanese Zero Series was designed to be deployed in standardized 12-car sets, but the Metroliner was designed for flexibility. Each car was self-powered with a cab at one end. These were grouped in pairs of 2, and a train could be made longer or shorter based on the number of passengers using that service.
They wanted to be able to adjust the size of the train to the passenger load, rather than having an inflexible back and forth train riding with only half the seats filled.
So, in early 1967, testing began on the new trains.
The dawn of a new era in rail transportation.
In trials, they smashed the 150 mph target set by the Department of Transportation. But there was trouble on the line ahead. You see, it wasn't just the trains that were made to run at breakneck speed. The whole program was being pushed to its limits. The bill that gave birth to the project was signed into law in 1965. Negotiations with the Pennsylvania Railroad continued until 1966, and the train was due to go into service in October 1967. It took Japan 6 years to plan and build the Shinkansen, but the US was hoping to do the same in just 25 months. As a result, technical issues began to pile up. 50 carriages were ordered in anticipation of the Metroliner entering service. It was the biggest order of new cars in over a decade, and the Budd Company had just 17 months to build them. The vehicles that were delivered were riddled with bugs, broken traction systems, engine fires, and doors that flew off at high speeds. The opening of the Metroliner service was delayed until 1969. But even then, most issues weren't resolved. Between 1969 and 1970, nearly half of the Metroliner cars were out of service because of technical faults. But surely, as long as the trains were travelling at 150 miles an hour, it was mission accomplished, right? Well, no. For most of its service, the average Metroliner speed was just 110 miles per hour. The test track used for the early cars provided exceptionally favourable conditions. It was straight and flat, with a slight downward slope. The rest of the track between Washington and New York was upgraded as planned, but there was only so much that could be done. Ultimately, the trains were still running on the same track and route as 100 years ago.
it was not purposely built for high-speed rail, and that is going to be an Achilles heel. There's a lot of things that need to go into making a high-speed line, and if you pulled that out and put it somewhere else, I would build it straight, I would build it flat, I would build it with the most contemporary modern technology as far as equipment, but also as the infrastructure surrounding it.
You see, Japan never had that problem. When work began on the Shinkansen, most of Japan's trains ran on narrow gauge track that could navigate the twists and turns of its mountainous landscape.
In other words, track that would never be suitable for a high-speed train. Instead of upgrading, an entirely new purpose-built route was constructed, a new main line, or Shinkansen in Japanese.
The US had become great at singular technological breakthroughs, the atom bomb, the space race. High-speed rail was considered as another one of these moonshot projects. A technical problem that could be solved by putting the country's best and brightest minds on it. But it wasn't about that. It was about the long, hard yards of meticulous planning. As Japan learned, high-speed rail wasn't a technical revolution. It was a triumph of bureaucracy.
この辺りは用地の買収が難しかったので、品格線を利用し、鉄道用地。
Ultimately, the Metroliner was short-lived. After service began in 1969, technical issues were slowly addressed, but at huge cost. In 1971, Amtrak took over the network and quickly started looking for a replacement. Various cars were overhauled and repurposed, and the Metroliner brand was kept alive until 2006. But the original service began to be phased out back in 1976 and was ended completely in 1981. The very cool turbo train didn't achieve much glory either. Heavily reliant on diesel, it was hit by the 1970s energy crisis, and service ended in 1976. The US is still struggling with this problem today. California High-Speed Rail is learning the lessons from Metroliner by carving out its own route along the west coast. But as a result of that, it's become tangled up in the thorny issue of land acquisition. It's hardly encouraging, but the High Speed Act does have a legacy it can be proud of, and one that Senator Pell saw coming all along. You see, the Metroliner may not have lived up to its Japanese counterpart, but against all the odds, people loved it.
The Metroliner program, at least in the early years, worked very, very well and attracted a lot of ridership. The oil shock of 1973 definitely gave people second thoughts about owning two cars or driving long distances, especially when a service like this was available. In fact, railroads were scrambling, and Amtrak at the time was scrambling to find equipment to be able to serve the traveling public.
Across most of the US, rail isn't a viable mass transport option. But despite that, the Northeast Corridor Rail Network has become a critical piece of national infrastructure. 800,000 people ride this network every day across 2,000 trains. The region it serves generates 20% of America's GDP and 30% of its jobs. It may be creaking and in need of repair, but that's in spite of its ridership, not because of it.
Ultimately, Pell's analysis of rail being the mainstay of transport in this region was correct. And for that, we have the humble Metroliner to thank. This video was made possible by Odoo. Check them out at the link below. And remember that it massively helps us to keep producing these videos when you guys take the time to go and check out our video sponsors. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.